110, 130. Why? When? When do you use what when? We're gonna help you out. Hey, it's Chase with another Legend Tech video, and in this video we're going to be talking specifically about spring rates, when you need what spring rate, and for what application to make sure that you're getting exactly what you need. So we offer several different spring rates, and Legend Suspensions really recommends, honestly, just buy one of everything, because that's going to be the easiest way for you to figure out what spring rate you want. That's a joke. Okay. So you got a 110 spring rate, and you got a 130. This is gonna cover pretty much all coil shocks for FLs, Dynas, Sportsters, everything except for an Indian Scout. And then of course, the Softails are different. It is a very simple answer, and it is also a mildly complicated one at the same time. A lot of it has to do with just your rider weight, how often you're solo and two up, and then suspension geometry comes into play just a little bit when you're talking about spring rates. For instance, on something like a touring model, basically any FL, really we stick pretty strong to, if you're not adding 500 pounds to the bike 50% of the time or more, in most cases you're gonna be able to get away with going with a standard spring rate, which is the 110. Just says 110 right on the coil. The HD spring is gonna say 130 right on the coil. That tells you what spring rate you have, and there's not a crazy amount of difference between them. It's just that in certain applications, one spring rate may be suited for that particular job a little bit better. You may not need to add so much preload to your shock to achieve the exact same thing. For instance, if you regularly have close to 400, 500 pounds on a touring bike, you can go with an HD spring. It is not as cut and dry as, this is specifically when I hit 500 pounds, now I need an HD spring. If it's only once in a while that you're 4 or 5, 550 pounds on there, the standard spring is still gonna do the trick. But if you are consistently riding in that 500 pound range, if you're 375 solo and you just prefer a stiffer ride, or if you are, regularly in the 425, 400 range, the HD spring is not going to be too stiff. It is just going to require less turns of adjustment between these two to get you to a certain point. Now, if you're drastically changing your ride from something like, let's say you're 170 pounds and you ride 50% of the time solo, 50% of the time two up, and maybe you are packing on a ton of gear and another passenger and you're up in the 400 or 500 pound range, standard spring's still gonna be totally fine. You're not gonna want the HD spring because the 50% of the time that you're solo is gonna give you too firm of a spring rate, and you're not gonna achieve the appropriate suspension sag that you're looking for, and that's gonna give you, in most cases, a firmer ride than what you're looking for. Now, they would make one mattress if everybody felt soft and firm the exact same. And because we all know that that's not true, we've got different spring rates. And that means that there's a lot of personal preference in this. When you go over to something specifically like a Dyna, they have a lot steeper shock angle. That gives the swing arm more leverage to compress that shock, and you generally would combat it with a firmer spring rate. So if you're solo or two up on FL models, it really just comes down to, it's a decent deciding factor of, if you're really kind of dancing around that 500 pounds pretty consistently, go HD. If you're on the lighter side and you're just adding that weight later on, even if it's 50% of the time, you don't want the other 50% of the time to be too stiff. When it comes to the Dyna models, across the board, really, if you're riding two up on a Dyna at all, you're gonna want an HD spring rate. You've got a shock that's sitting here, the passenger seat is back behind that, and you're adding a lot of leverage weight that is helping compress that shock. And due to that shock geometry, you need a fairly firm spring rate to keep that from bottoming out. Now, 150, 160, 170 pounds, always ride solo, just out cruising, you can get away with a standard spring rate. 220, 225, riding solo with an aggressive riding style, HD spring rate. If you're 170 riding 2-up, HD spring rate. Anytime you're adding a passenger to a Dyna, you're gonna want an HD spring rate for sure. So when it comes to those different applications, it's really just a matter of figuring out specifically how much time you are spending on that bike in what weight range, so that you can determine which spring rate that you need to best suit whatever your application is. So don't be afraid of the term HD. This spring is a lot longer and a lot lighter than even a factory spring rate, so you're not gonna get that dumpster on wheels beating you up like it's, you know, got square tires on your bike. These are designations to help you just get the correct spring for the application. There is a ton of adjustment to these, looser and tighter. So either way, you can figure out, specifically what you need. If you buy a spring that maybe you can't get the appropriate suspension sag on, we can do those swaps as well. We can move you from a 130 to a 110. People's riding styles change. Maybe you do a lot of 2-up riding and you need that HD spring, and all of a sudden you're riding solo and you need a different spring rate. You can just contact us via email and we can get you some information so that we can get that swap for you. Over on the Softail models, we've got 2 different springs. There's an 850 and a 1000, and the brake there is really the 250 pound range. So if you're under 250, the standard 850 spring rate is going to more than likely be what you want to go with. If you are 250 and above solo rider weight, then you want the 1000 HD spring rate. If you're riding 2-up on there and your combined weight with your gear and whatever you've got on the bike is a 250 or above, then you're still going to want that HD spring rate. Follows the same kind of guidelines, but you're talking about shocks that are essentially under the bike like this, and when they've got a lot of leverage as well. So these have very short springs that have to be quite firm to give you the support you need, but also give you a comfortable ride. And then once you've got the preload set on these shocks with the coil, then you can start adjusting your rebound adjusters, or on the ARC model, you've got rebound and compression where you can start dialing those in. But getting the correct spring rate is simple. It's just a matter of figuring out how much weight you've got on your bike, the most consistent amount of time, because that's gonna be the spring rate that we wanna get you for that application, to make sure that if you're a light rider that's adding X amount of weight, that it's not too stiff for the time that you're solo, or if you're consistently adding a lot of weight, that you're not maybe experiencing bottom outs just due to something as simple as you need to get the correct spring. So that covers the majority of spring rates in general. It is a very simple thing. You can always just follow the guideline. It is a pretty particular one in our website, as well as any local motorcycle shop is going to be able to help you figure out what spring rate you need. Just know that there is wiggle room in spring rates. It is not a 500-pound gospel. If you're slightly over, slightly under occasionally, you can do all kinds of things with spring rates. It's not always about just tightening the spring. You can loosen it to do different things as well. So if you have any questions, shoot us an email, service@legendsuspensions.com, or visit your local motorcycle shop. Let them know what your riding setup looks like so that they can help you pick out the spring rate. And we will talk to you next time on the Next Tech Tuesday. The benchwarmers, semi-sprinkler. In Australia, they call them shockies. It's a fun fact for you. Okay, today we're talking about spring rates here. About bone and think thing. Quiet on the set. Yeah, don't you click that thing and say action. Scene 1, take 1. Beep, beep, beep. Oh, it's good. It's good. Ready to start?